Hey y'all, your favorite nerdy girl is back, Nerdy Girl Reviews, and we are back now with a movie review for Candyman. Currently nationwide in every movie theater available. I'm sure in your city, in your state. Please go watch it. I was incredibly impressed. If you'd like to see the full review, stay here. And if you'd like to see my other reviews, you can find me on YouTube and you can find me on sofritoforyoursoul.com. So stay tuned for all the boo horror goodies. Now, fair warning, the movie premiered on August 27th. It's been a number of weeks now since I saw it. I saw it on opening weekend. Spoiler, this is a full clip of spoilers, so if you haven't watched it, go watch it, then come back. But nonetheless, also I want to point out this is supposed to be Honeycombs, and I'm trying to mimic the best possible way that I can honeycombs with my aesthetic. And also because I wanted to pay homage to the film. It is an elevated, and to quote my friend, a very smart horror film. You get the gore, you get the slasher effect like you would with any movie, but I will say that it's an elevated kind of nuanced film, and I can appreciate that. Not every film do I necessarily want to be spoon-fed. That's why I think that a lot of current films, horror films, have kind of strayed away from like the psychological way of horror, of like letting your mind kind of psych you out, as opposed to just having it like force feed it to you with CGI and everything. And don't get me wrong, I can appreciate that, and there were some instances that you do see that in this film. No film is free of CGIs. No film is free now of texting, because that's the reality we live in. But nonetheless, there were small instances of that old wave movie viewing as a spectator, which I appreciated. So this is a Monkey Paw production, Jordan Peele production, and he also co-wrote the film alongside director Nia DaCosta. And bravo! I honestly commend her for her great talent at such a young age. She is 31 and she has broken barriers. She is the first black female director to kick ass in the box office. For that particular opening weekend, I don't think there's never been another one. There hasn't been another female, and much less a woman of color, to be that groundbreaking when it came to those numbers. So kudos to her. We applaud her, and we need to see more of her. We need to see more of her work, and we need to see more directors like her in these positions, because yes, this is what we need. More representation, por favor. So moving forward, let's get into a little bit of the history, and then we'll break down the film. Okay? Hold on. Now I'm going to be reading a little bit of history, just so that you don't get confused. And honestly, not for nothing, the way the film ends, and I know I'm jumping all over the place, but bear with me. I think that this film in particular lends itself to maybe a sequel, and maybe in the vein of Ryan Murphy, that is able to interweave real, actual atrocities of American crime stories into fiction, could probably lend itself to a possible sequel, prequel. But I just want to state that in the history of crime, there has existed men with the title, or they self-proclaimed themselves as Candyman, but they were actual notorious killers or serial killers. So one in particular, and I didn't know this information until I did my research, and I came across a makeup artist on YouTube, and her name escapes me now, but I will link her information in the description box. She does makeup, and she talks about a horror and atrocious crime at the same time, but it's informative. So the way she goes about it too, I kind of like her shtick. So I'll link her down below. But I came across two criminals in particular, and so one, his name is he went by the name of Ronald Clark O'Brien. He was born October 19, 1944, died March 31st, 1984, nicknamed the Candyman. And the man who killed Halloween was an American man convinced of killing his 8-year-old son on Halloween 1974 with a potassium cyanide lace pixie stick that was collected during a trick-or-treat outing. O'Brien poisoned his son in order to claim life insurance money to ease his own financial troubles. He was in debt for $100,000. O'Brien also distributed poison candy to his daughter and 3 other children in an attempt to cover up his crime. However, neither his daughter nor the other children ate the poison candy. He was convicted of capital murder on June 1975 and sentenced to death, and he was executed by lethal injection on March 1984. So that was one Candyman in particular. If that's not chilling enough, let's move on to Dean Arnold Kroll. Born December 24th, 1939, and died August 8th, 1973, was an American serial killer who abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered at least 28 teenage boys and young men between 1970 and 1973 in Houston and Pasadena, Texas. He was aided by 2 teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. The crimes, which became known as the Houston Mass Murders, came to light after Henley fatally shot Kroll. Upon discovery, it was considered the worst example of serial murder in U.S. history. Kroll, also known as the Candyman and the Pied Piper, because he and his family had previously owned and operated a candy factory in Houston Heights, and he had been known to give free candy to local children. Now, the reason why I make mention is because there is a particular Candyman that we see in this version who would do that. He would give candy to children. So again, I don't know if these real life instances that did occur in American crime stories somehow was able to be interwoven into the story, but they changed certain things around. But these 2 individuals did exist. Now, if you want to know more information of the last person I mentioned, Kroll, the Kroll character, if you are familiar with Mindhunter season 2, he's made mention, but there isn't an actor who's interpreting him, because by this time that they're interviewing these inmates, he has already died because he was shot by one of the accomplices. So one of the accomplices is interviewed in season 2, so I highly recommend you watch that too, so you have a little bit of backstory. So Candyman originates from it originates from a book of anthologies based on horror. It's under the title Books of Blood, in a series of 6 horror fiction anthologies collecting original stories written by British author, playwright, and filmmaker Clive Barker in 1984 and 1985. Known primarily to write stage plays beforehand, Barker gained a wider audience and fan base through his anthology series, leading to a successful career as a novelist. Originally presented as 6 volumes, the anthologies were subsequently republished in 2 editions containing 3 volumes each. Each volume contains 4 or 5 stories. So again, if you're familiar with his work, he was the influence behind Candyman, and I believe even Hellraiser. So if you've seen these films, you know the story was adapted from his book, from his stories. So for Candyman in volume 5 in this Book of Blood, we see he writes, so the characters were there of Helen. And if you see the 1992 film, that main character her name is Helen. But anyway, Helen is a university student doing a thesis on graffiti who selects a rundown estate as a focus for her study. She notices disturbing graffiti and references an urban legend called the Candyman. Further inquiries lead her to believe that that this is connected with a recent murders and mutilation. Although the locals are reluctant to discuss the incidents, she eventually encounters the Candyman himself. The story was later adapted and made into the successful film Candyman in 1992. Now, Candyman, 1992 American Gothic supernatural horror film written and directed by Bernard Rose and starring Virginia Madsen, the famous Tony Todd, who is our Candyman. It was based on Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden. The film follows a Chicago graduate student completing a thesis on urban legends and folklore, which leads her to the legend of the Candyman, the ghost of an artist and the son of a slave who was murdered in the late 19th century for his relationship with the daughter of a wealthy white man. The film came to fruition after a chance meeting with Rose and Barker, who recently completed his own film adaptation, Nightbreed. Rose expressed interest in Baker's story, The Forbidden. Barker agreed to license the rights, where the Barker story revolved around the themes of the British class system in contemporary Liverpool. Okay, so take that into account. Rose chose to refit the story to Cabrini Green's public housing development in Chicago and instead focus on the themes of race and social class in the inner city of the United States. So there's a lot of history here, and they wanted to take their own interpretation far from the book version. So they would reinvent it for the film adaptation, but still has a context of classism, but now let's wedge on racism for the time being of the early 90s. Now what Jordan Peele's and Nia DaCosta's version is that it takes that bulk of oppression and racism, and let's add on now the internet and what we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years, because now everybody is online. And especially in the last year, they filmed this recent adaptation before Black Lives Matter movement and what we saw during COVID and what we saw with George Floyd. But we were seeing it regardless. We were seeing it with Trayvon Martin and all these other innocent young men, basically meeting their demise for no particular reason other than the fact that they were black. So they added that context into the film, which enriches the story way more and makes it socially conscious. Even down to how Nia decided to tell this story. The visuals she used art. She was very smart in using art, because our main focus is art in a very bourgeois setting. And again, I also want to make note, I loved that I saw just black characters, an overall black cast, and everybody there was not the stereotypical trope. Everybody was college educated, everybody was really well to do, living in these incredible posh apartments, loft buildings. And it's almost like it's like we reimagined that story, because the 1992 version, our focus is still very much on the, I hate saying it to y'all, the big white hope, right? Because that's what Hollywood has pushed down our throats since the start of film, since the start of celluloid. You can't live like a life like that. It's always through the counterpart. You're the counterpart, and then the main lead is always the white lead. So in the 1992 version, even though it is scary and it's a great story, but we follow her. Our main lead is Helen. It's not really even Candyman. And I will also link another reviewer. I believe his name is The Film Snob. And he is, if you really want a recap of those three films, the first one is honestly that's the one to watch. The other two sequels weren't so interesting, but he describes it so hysterically well that I recommend you watching it too, because it'll give you some kind of context of what you're watching. So when you watch this particular film, you don't necessarily need to watch